think most of you know of Barbara already. She is Director General of CIP. Since 2014 already, she is an accomplished senior executive with more than 30 years of scientific and business experience in research, general management, strategic planning, regulatory processes, and the technical development and commercialization of products in agricultural and forestry markets, and this throughout the world. Additionally, she has an extensive board experience, having served on several private sector, industry associations, and non-profit boards and advisory committees. Prior to joining CIP, she has worked as a senior executive in companies such as Agrivida, Latin America for Emergent Genetics, and Arbor Gin. Dr. Wells also spent 18 years at Monsanto as co-managing director for Brazilian operations. She received her PhD in agronomy from Oregon State University, her master's degree in plant pathology, and her bachelor degree with honors in horticulture from the University of Arizona. Dr. Barbara Wells will try to take us into the future.
Okay, great. Well, I believe that I lost a few of the ministers who are now meeting, so I won't go forward with acknowledging them. But I wanted to start out by acknowledging Dr. Miguel Barandiaran, head of the National Institute of Agriculture, whom we heard from this morning. Distinguished guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, and all other protocols observed in the event that I've missed someone. It is a particular pleasure and honor to address you this morning on the first day of the 10th World Potato Congress and the 28th Latin American Potato Association Congress. In case you are not familiar with the International Potato Center, we are a non-profit international organization that is headquartered in Peru and active in research for development for the benefit of resource-poor farmers in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. We are part of the CGIAR, which is the world's largest global agricultural innovation network that brings together 15 international research for development centers. As CIP's Director General, this Potato Congress is particularly special, not only because it is the first Congress to be held in Latin America, and because it's being held in conjunction with the Latin American Potato Association Congress, but also because, as you all know, it's taking place in the potato center of origin, near where the potato species were domesticated some 10,000 years ago, marking the beginning of the tuber's role as an essential food source. Peru is the cradle of potato cultivation, home to more than half of the world's approximately 5,000 potato varieties, most of which we're representing in the CIP Gene Bank, which conserves genetic diversity in trust for humanity. While the potato is a global crop, it plays a critical and economic and cultural role in the Andes. This region holds most of the world's potato biodiversity, including varieties and crop wild relatives with traits that can be used to improve more widely cultivated potatoes. This will help farmers throughout the world to produce food demanded by growing population while adapting to increasingly challenging environmental stresses that result from climate change. As you know, 1.3 billion people around the world eat potatoes as a staple crop. This is the world's third most important crop after wheat and rice, and it is increasingly important for those who live in poverty and suffer hunger or malnutrition. The Research for Development community is leveraging the potato's popularity, resiliency, and adaptability to continue to contribute to food security, nutrition, and incomes for the poor across the globe, while helping farmers adapt to climate change so that those gains are sustainable. One of the primary goals of research for development organizations is food security, which is defined as when people have access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences to lead a happy and active, healthy life. Clearly, this is extremely difficult to achieve, as 870 million people globally are undernourished, which means that about 1 out of every 9 people doesn't get enough food to lead a healthy, normal life. As you might imagine, most of these people are in Africa, where 1/4 of the population is undernourished, or in Asia, where 1 out of every 6 people doesn't get enough to eat. The challenge of feeding the world today is great, but it will be even greater in 2050 when we have an estimated 9.7 billion people sharing the planet. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the International Food Policy Research Institute estimate that the global food production will need to increase by 60%, and that food production in the developing world will need to double to meet future demand. Feeding nearly 10 billion people will require substantial improvements to global food systems to make it more efficient and resilient, to provide decent livelihoods for farmers and nutritious products for consumers. It must also become more inclusive, recognizing the roles and needs of women and creating opportunities for youth, who are our future. At the same time, it is imperative that we reduce food loss and waste. According to the FAO, about 1/3 of the food produced for human consumption each year is lost or wasted, and this simply must change. We also must deal with the fact that some food production and processing practices are putting unsustainable pressure on the environmental resources, and we will only make it harder to produce enough food in the future. While ensuring no one has to endure hunger, we must also be concerned about micronutrient deficiencies, known as hidden hunger, which affects more than 2 billion people globally. A lack of sufficient vitamins or micronutrients, such as vitamin A, iron, and zinc, can result in a host of health problems, mental impairment, and even death. Hunger and micronutrient deficiencies pose the greatest threats to children, especially within the first 1,000 days of their life. Malnourished children are 10 times more likely to die from preventative diseases than healthy children. Vitamin A and zinc deficiencies alone are responsible for deaths of more than 1 million children each year. But hidden hunger afflicts millions more and has consequences that can last a person's entire lifetime. Nearly 160 million children globally suffer from chronic malnutrition or stunting, which has been associated with diminishing mental health capacity, poor school performance, and reduced earnings as adults. Hidden hunger is also a major problem for women, who play a vital role in improving the diets of their children. However, social inequality and lack of knowledge of nutrition among poor women exacerbate this problem. Research for development organizations are consequently using gender-responsive and culturally appropriate approaches to develop and deliver nutritious crops, nutrition education, and agronomic and market training for rural women. It is important to remember that working to relieve hunger and malnutrition is not just a moral issue. It is one also that makes economic sense. It has been estimated that the world loses between 2 and 3% of the gross domestic product each year because of hunger. But economic growth is key. While economic growth is key to reducing poverty, it is not alone, and doesn't guarantee reductions in hunger and malnutrition. Peru, for example, which has enjoyed a healthy economic growth for the past 15 years, illustrates this well. Though the national poverty rate has dropped more than 50% to 22%, approximately 44% of the rural population still lives below the poverty level. According to Peruvian national statistics from 2017, 40% of children between 6 and 35 months of age suffer anemia, which is much more prevalent in rural Peru than in urban areas. Growth in agricultural productivity is key to reducing rural poverty, since most of the poor depend on agriculture and related activities for their livelihoods. Because the potato is grown in areas with high levels of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition, it can be a particularly effective crop for helping smallholder families to attain food security and lift themselves out of poverty. Though more than 1 billion people eat potatoes, the crop's potential for strengthening food security diets and incomes has yet to be fully exploited. The potato has many advantages. 1 hectare of tubers can produce between 2 and 4 times as many healthy calories as grain crops. Potatoes also produce more food per unit of water than most crops, and they are ready to harvest between 3 and 4 months after planting. The relatively short maturity period allows potatoes to be grown on land that would otherwise lay fallow between grain planting cycles, which helps farmers produce more food and increase their incomes. In parts of Africa, potatoes are often available during what is known as the hunger months, that is, before grains are ready to harvest, thus playing a central role for food security and income generation. The crop's high caloric content and micronutrients, together with its resilience and extraordinary adaptive range, make it a powerful tool for reducing chronic hunger and malnutrition. The potato has a long history for contributing to food security and household incomes. From the Andes to Europe to Asia and Africa, the scientific communities are rapidly evolving knowledge in potato genomics and other innovations to accelerate the development and deployment of more productive and resilient potato varieties, and are opening a new chapter in that history, which will ensure that the potato continues producing sufficient food under whatever extreme conditions the future may bring. Until early 1990s, North America, Europe, and the former Soviet Union were the top potato growing and consuming regions. But since then, there has been a significant increase in potato production in developing countries. The potato is now truly a global crop that is cultivated and consumed in 163 countries, with global potato production approaching 400 million tons per year. The last 2 decades have seen a steady increase in global potato production. Asia has experienced the most dramatic increase, and that region is now responsible for about half of the world's potato production and consumption. This is mainly thanks to China and India, where production has increased by over 100% in the last 20 years. At the same time, Africa has experienced an important increase in production, and in both Asia and Africa, the potato has become increasingly important to farmers who rely on it for food security and incomes. It is hardly a coincidence that the potato is the third most important crop in the world. It is packed with nutritious calories and delicious and versatile. In a growing number of poor farmers are interested in growing potato because of its adaptability and relatively short maturity period, and the fact that it can be both food security crop and an income generator. In addition to being an excellent source of carbohydrates, potatoes have relatively high levels of vitamin C, iron and zinc, potassium and antioxidants, which means they can contribute to improved nutrition as well as food security. Scientists at SIP have spent the last decade crossing potatoes with high iron and zinc content to enhance the tuber's nutritional value. This has resulted in biofortified potatoes with nearly double the initial content of iron and zinc, which can contribute to the reduction of malnutrition and anemia. While the potato has a great potential for improving food security and nutrition in developing countries, these countries present varied conditions and constraints that make growing potatoes much more challenging than in North America and Europe. It is thus important for international organizations, governments, and businesses to develop and promote appropriate technologies and approaches that enable those farmers to make the best of local conditions. The average farmer in the developing world has limited assets and very little land. In the case of potato, that land is often mountainous, and soil erosion, weather extremes, dispersed production, and other constraints present challenges for managing, harvesting, and storing the crop. Planting seasons vary significantly from one country or region to the next. Some areas have short growing seasons, where others have 2 seasons, and the risk of drought and too much precipitation increasing under the climate change. Farmers also have to contend with high disease and pest pressure, which are year-round threats. They also lack reliable access to agrochemicals or knowledge about their optimal use, which can result in significant yield loss. Smallholders often live in areas where roads and other infrastructure are limited to making it harder to access farm supplies and get their crops to market. Quality agricultural inputs are usually scarce, and for many farmers, they are prohibitively expensive. Women, who play important roles in agriculture, food security, and family diets, face additional challenges due to cultural norms. Women farmers often have different knowledge, perceptions, and expectations than men, yet they are all too often overlooked by programs to improve small-scale agricultural production. Ignoring the roles and needs of women undermines the effectiveness of agricultural development interventions, so it is essential to use gender-responsive approaches. These and other factors are responsible for the vast differences in potato yields between developed and developing countries. While countries in the Andes region and most of Africa and Asia have average yields of between 10 and 20 tons per hectare, most farmers in the United States and Europe produce more than 40 tons per hectare. The difference is referred to as the yield gap, and closing the global yield gap is essential for tapping the potato's potential to improve the food security and incomes of some of the world's poorest farming families. It is thus a central goal of the Research for Development communities. Given the varied constraints that farmers in the less developed countries face, closing the yield gap won't be easy. However, I like to think that those challenges as opportunities for research to develop pro-poor solutions. I'd like now to continue to share with you some of the most important areas in which agriculture research institutions are working to help resource poor farmers close this yield gap. Breeding has been a long priority for organizations dedicated to poor farmers increasing their potato yields. Over the years, potato breeders have developed high-yielding varieties that are resistant to late blight and virus diseases, which are probably the top constraints for smallholder farmers in the production of potato in the tropics and subtropics. This vast majority of those farmers lack access to these disease-free seed, whereas funds to produce the fungicides needed to control the late blight are scarce. It is vital that potato improvement programs focus on climate-smart technologies because climate change is having disproportionate impact on farmers in some of the world's poorest regions. Resilient, adapted varieties that can produce enough food under extreme weather conditions are urgently needed. As an example, we are involved in efforts to introduce quickly maturing drought, heat, and salt-tolerant varieties into fallow windows of wheat and rice cropping systems in Asia. This can increase food security and incomes while decreasing farmers' vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. Breeding programs also need to respond to market trends that arise from urbanization in order to provide farmers with varieties that are demanded by high-value urban markets. While increasing food production and availability are essential, improving the quality of diets is also vital, especially considering the high levels of malnutrition and the gravity of its consequences. As I mentioned, biofortified potato varieties rich in iron and zinc make an important contribution to such efforts. Varieties that combine tolerance to biotic stress and resistance to crop diseases with high levels of iron and zinc can help farmers adapt to climate change while reducing malnutrition. One of the main challenges facing breeding programs is the necessity of speeding up the development, release, and distribution of improved varieties because the need of them is great. The good news is that advances in genomics, high-throughput phenotyping, and other technologies are providing opportunities to streamline the selection and advancement of new varieties. For governments and businesses to get improved varieties out to smallholder farmers who need them more quickly, research and investment are needed to improve and expand potato seed systems. Technologies to accelerate the production of high-quality seed, such as aeroponics and apical cuttings, are increasingly being adopted in public institutions and businesses in South America, East Africa, and Asia. Seed systems are vital for deploying improved potato varieties, but it is important to recognize that more than 90% of farmers in developing countries lack access to them. Those farmers either select seed for the next planting season from their own harvest or purchase it from informal sources, and it's usually of low sanitary quality. Scientists who study root and tuber systems have consequently recommended an integrated approach that combines clean seed systems with decentralized seed multipliers and the promotion of training in on-farm selection and storage practices that can help farmers improve the quality of seed potatoes that they plant. While access to improved varieties and quality seed potatoes can significantly improve small farmers' yields, there are plenty of other challenges between planting and harvest that can undercut their effectiveness. Technologies to manage them are being promoted in the field, including the decision support tools to improve the use of fungicides for late blight, integrated pest management, water savings, irrigation methods, better soil management, and other sustainable farming approaches. These low-cost, appropriate technologies can enable men and women farmers to improve their potato yields and farm resilience in the face of climate change. While eliminating hunger and malnutrition are urgent tasks, they must also go hand in hand with efforts to help rural families improve their incomes. This means developing dynamic, high-value markets for potatoes and enabling farmers to gain access to value chains and connect them to those markets. An example of this approach is in the public and private collaboration in the Andes region, especially in Peru, that has capitalized on potato biodiversity to develop new market opportunities for small-scale farmers to grow native potatoes. Work through innovative platforms and public-private partnerships has enabled farmers to gain access to niche markets for traditional crops. Colorful tubers that had only been consumed in the rural Andes are now sold and served in supermarkets and restaurants of the region's cities and are exported as potato chips and other processed foods. In Peru, the sales of native potatoes have increased more than 70% and market prices for them by 150%, which has enabled many rural farmers to farm their way out of poverty. Another important piece of the puzzle is improving post-harvest management in order to reduce the loss of potatoes and their quality. While there is growing awareness of food waste and on the retail and consumer levels, we need to pay more attention to post-harvest loss on the farm and transportation and storage. Recent research in Ecuador and Peru confirms that this constitutes a significant portion of food production that is lost or wasted in the developing world. While challenges for feeding almost 10 billion people, reducing micronutrient deficiencies, and creating income opportunities for the rural poor are daunting, research organizations, governments, and businesses have made important progress on technologies that will enhance our ability to achieve these goals. The potato is already playing a key role in efforts to reduce hunger, malnutrition, and poverty, and I believe that we have only begun to tap the tuber's full potential. Various appropriate technologies and approaches promoted across the globe are helping smallholder farmers adapt to climate change, increase their production, and limit their environmental impacts. They include resilient, nutritious, climate-smart potato varieties, innovations to accelerate seed production, appropriate technologies to improve the detection and control of crop pests, and market innovations to create income opportunities. As we work on more integrated science and development approaches to help the global food system adapt and prepare to the challenges ahead, CIP is eager to collaborate with new partners in the government, business, and nonprofit sectors. I would thus like to invite any and all of you who are interested to join us in this mission. It is vital for organizations such as all of ours to partner with business and government to strengthen our research and development agenda and work towards this common goal. Thank you. So pretty complimentary to David's comments.
Thank you for that, Barbara. Very interesting presentation, resulting in a number of questions, some of them challenging perhaps. First one we have here, there are places like China where the production has increased or doubled. Can you say how the potato consumption or whether the potato consumption has increased with the same speed in that area.
I can say that 3 years ago, when the World Potato Congress was held in China, China announced making the potato a staple crop. So as the production has increased, certainly the consumption has very much increased, and the ways in which they utilize and prepare potatoes has also significantly increased. So not only is it prepared as the potato itself, but there's the making of bread, the making of noodles, and processing the potatoes. So it's increased significantly.
Okay, so the question is, can it be in line with each other, consumption and production? So you will estimate that it is quite in line.
Can consumption and production...
And the increased production in China be in line with each other?
I think they are aligning with each other. And as I said, with the naming of the potato as a staple crop, it's created new markets. So as the production continues to increase in China, so have the different uses and the demand.
Very good. The second question is also a challenging one. The footprint of poverty is in line with the high production of potatoes. So is there any correlation between poverty and potatoes? The more you grow potatoes, the more poor you will be.
I would say quite the opposite. As you look at Africa, for example, and I mentioned that potato is a very important crop in many countries by the simple fact that it is a crop that we're able to grow it during the hunger months. So it is actually a crop that is produced while the farmers are waiting for the ability to harvest grains. And the other thing is that it's also very much a cash crop in countries in Africa. So they're not only able to improve food security by having availability of the potato between the grain crop harvests, but also because it's a cash crop, they're able to improve their income.
Very clear. From the same challenging person, will SIP be focusing more on sweet potato than on what in Africa is called Irish potato, the white potato?
So potato and sweet potato are both our mandate crops. And we focus on both crops in a very equivalent way. We have gotten a lot of attention for the tremendous work that we've done over the last 15 years with the orange flesh sweet potato, in that we've been able to demonstrate that we can increase the level of beta-carotene and improve vitamin A that's available for those consuming it. And in fact, we won the World Food Prize. We have 3 scientists who won the World Food Prize 2 years ago for that work, and we have been able to impact up till now 5 million households, or some 5 million or 25 million individuals, by improving the vitamin A content in their diet and significantly reducing the occurrence of childhood blindness. But at the same time, you have to understand that sweet potato and potato grow in different ecosystems. So as we look at the work that we do around the world, they're equally important to the work that we do. They're both crops that are very significant in improving the health and nutrition and sustainability of the lives of the rural poor.
So no competition between them.
No.
Very good.
At least not as much, not that I have to do.
No, for the SIP, clear. So another question, we heard it also from David, the relationship between the private sector and the public sector. And here also we have a question, how much of SIP's budget is coming from the private sector? And is it possible to increase that contribution from the private sector?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, because as we work on, our mandate is to work on research for development, And we do work a lot in value chains and developing different products to be able to take the products to market in different forms and higher value. But the knowledge to really be able to scale those products is very much resides with the public sector. So we do have, and I think we have to look at the public sector in varying degrees of size too, because we tend to think of public sector as big companies. But they could be small entrepreneurial companies that were working together to improve the value and accessibility of those products. And it's also critical as you begin to really consider the urbanization of populations and the fact that you want to create opportunities so that rural people can stay in their communities, not only in the farming operations, but in the farming businesses that evolve from those operations, but also making sure that the products, healthy products, are being moved to urban areas.
Perhaps a quick answer on this one, because we still have 1 or 2 to go. Does SIP know how many seed accelerated production centers are available, and are they efficient at this moment?
So I couldn't speak to how many seed production, I mean there's hundreds, from government organizations that work with us to private sector certainly, but they are extremely efficient in developing and producing high quality seed.
Okay, thank you for the quick answer. This one is perhaps needs a question, or an answer to the question, is there a doctor in the room? But I'm going to ask it anyhow. If potato is high on iron and zinc, why it's not so clear to me, but why is in high elevation people, why are high elevation people anemic? And how much potato is needed to cover nutritional needs for zinc and iron?
So also a good question, but I would say at the levels that zinc and iron are currently in potatoes, they are high in iron and zinc, but not high enough in iron and zinc to really address the issue of reducing and eliminating anemia. And I think what you also have to look at is the combination and the education that you need with health services to educate mothers on how to better feed their children and when they should be introducing these types of foods in their diet, which is something that we at SIP do a lot, is work with the health services within communities on education, nutrition education.
Very clear. And then I have the last question, quick answer if possible, because I'm already asked to close the session. Barbara talked about maximum yields of 40 ton per hectares, but also David said that commercial yields are unsustainable. So what do the panelists think is an optimum target yield for developing and developed systems? No speech about that, just a figure with a small comment, please.
I guess I've never thought of looking at things as what is the maximum yield. I look at it as what is the yield that should be produced in a system to better get the maximum productivity of a bread basket of different products for farmers and to families to benefit from.
Thank you. I think basically what I'm going to say is the same thing. It's not the fact that you yield your 40 tons is unsustainable. It's the system you're using to produce the 40 tons. I think we can still keep it at 40 tons or even increase it further, but we can change our systems to become sustainable.
Very clear. Biodiversity, food security, and business. It's coming also back in this one. So thank you very much, and I would like to invite you to have a round of applause for both Barbara Wells and David Lewis.
I would like to take a picture of the panel, if you may. Please stand at the center of the stage. Thank you. And also, of course, thank you for participating in this plenary session.